Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 3, Episode 7, Expenses. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start out with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 3, Episode 7. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So I'm just going to go right out here and say it. I wasn't very impressed with this episode, and I'm just going to say it. I thought this was a filler episode. Now, some important things did happen in this episode that helped push the story forward, but there were a lot of scenes that just dragged on for far longer than they needed to or didn't need to be there at all. To be perfectly honest, I could have done without the scene with Jimmy by the highway picking up garbage, and I could have done without the scene with Mike building the playground. But there was some good stuff in this episode, so let's get into it. So let's start with Jimmy's storyline, and the point of it was painfully obvious. This ties into the title of the episode, Expenses. It's all about Jimmy is not doing so well financially, and I think they kind of beat this point to death. Some people seem to like when the show or Breaking Bad does slow pace or too slow of a pace, but to me it seems mostly style over substance, because in terms of storytelling it's basically treating the audience like idiots by beating down the same point over and over and over and over again. Yes, we get it. Jimmy is losing money and spending money beyond his means. This could have been told in half the time that it was. That being said, there were some really good things here, such as the scene where they were shooting the commercial for the music store where the guys were having doubts and Jimmy tried to talk them into it by offering them 50% off, and when they wouldn't go for it, he went as far as to say free. That was a great scene because it showed how desperate Jimmy was for business. Instead of simply taking no for an answer, he even went as far as to do it for free, which was a smart decision if the commercial pays off and they come back for more. But if it not, it's wasted money, and regardless of what happens next, he's losing money in the meantime. This is in fact was a very powerful scene, and the only one you really needed in order to portray the conundrum that Jimmy was in. I suppose the first commercial with the recliner guy served the purpose to show what a normal commercial went like, and that Jimmy was desperate for upgrading, but I'm still not sure how necessary it was. At the very least, it could have been shorter. Now, the scenes with Jimmy and Kim were really interesting because it showed that Jimmy was hiding his financial problems from her, and more than that, he was spending beyond his means in order to pretend to Kim that he was fine, which was indicated when he told the waitress to stop using one credit card and switch to another, to which Kim asks if he were maxing out his credit cards, to which he said no, of course not, but of course he is. So this behavior was only go so far. So there were several possibilities on what will happen next. Either his commercial business will pick up and he'll make up for the losses, or his business won't pick up and he'll start to go under, in which case he may resort to getting involved with Mike or Nacho in some crime business. And knowing where his story is going, I kind of see this as the more likely possibility. So the scene where he ordered the Chinese delivery and the delivery boy complained about only getting $1 tip, so he replied, well, I could make it $0. That was cute. It showed that he was taking out his frustrations on other people. But as someone who worked as a delivery driver before, that was completely unprofessional behavior to complain about getting $1 tip. For one thing, $1 tip isn't great, but it's quite common and people don't bitch about it much. $2 is actually like the probably average, the most common. Less than $1, now that's when we start to get upset. But even then, I never knew anyone who had the goal to outright complain to a customer. It just doesn't happen, so I couldn't help but find this scene a bit fake for the purposes of plot convenience. But then again, this seems common in the Breaking Bad Saul universe, that everyone is sort of bitchy, whiny, and a smartass than they actually are in real life, so whatever. Anyway, the scene with Jimmy and Kim at the bar was more interesting, as it showed them sizing up people to run a scam, and when they see this guy being a total asshole to the waiter, Jimmy gets really caught up in this intricate plan to take this asshole down, so Kim has to remind him that they're not really going to do it, that they're just talking, and Jimmy's like, oh yeah, sure, we're just talking, but it's obvious he actually wanted to do it. Now, earlier, Kim made it clear he had he couldn't run any of these scams during his probation period because he could lose his license for good. Now we know he doesn't lose his license for good, but this scene does indicate that he wasn't taking this prohibition seriously. So I think it's possible he may get into some illegal practices in order to fix his current financial issues, which was in fact what Breaking Bad was all about. So I do think that's what this whole episode is setting up for. So we do see Jimmy go to the law firm insurance company to try to get the money back that he paid through the end of the year because he's no longer a lawyer, and we saw him on the phone earlier in the episode complaining about this. So when we go see him complain in person to an agent about this, we think it's just further trying to get his money back, but by the end of the scene it becomes apparent that this was not his purpose in going there. His purpose was to get back at Chuck. So when he's talking to the agent, he starts to break down crying when he learns his insurance will increase by 150%. And this seems like a genuine breakdown, as he's complaining about everything, like his car breaking down and just one, and his girlfriend being upset with him, just one thing adding on top of another. But we learned that the whole thing was actually just a performance, a way to sneakily make them aware of Chuck's condition and breakdown in court, which is likely to have consequences for Chuck. And Jimmy isn't going to benefit from any of this. This is done purely out of spite to get back at Chuck, because Jimmy blames all of his current problems on Chuck for doing that shit with the tape. And I love the way Jimmy charged out of the office, like really pissed off, how he instantly switched from crying to pissed off. It made it clear that the whole thing was just an act to get back at Chuck, which was so perfectly done. So Kim was interesting in this episode too, as it was obvious that she really regretted what she did to Chuck. But again, there was a bit on the nose by having her say that as far as she was concerned, all they did was tear down a sick man. I think we got that without her having to say that outright, but there it is. It was interesting that her Mercer Verde contact found it hilarious what they did to Chuck, but it was obvious that she was really bothered by this. And then later she brought it up with Jimmy, who was very firm that she needed to forget about it and that Chuck brought it on himself. And frankly, I agree with him. When Rebecca came and berated Jimmy for not helping, I totally agreed with Jimmy's response and felt if he did do as Rebecca asked, he'd be the world's biggest sucker. And it's apparent Jimmy has no regrets either, but Kim most certainly does, and apparently what Rebecca said did get to Kim. So I don't think she will simply forget about it, as Jamie suggests, and I think we're beginning to see a rift forming between Kim and Jimmy, and that's only going to get worse as he gets more involved with these shady things, but we'll see. So now let's get into the Mike side of the episode, and I won't talk much about the scenes with him at the school because I said these scenes were kind of boring and unnecessary. I guess they introduce this other character who is another parent or grandparent of someone going to the school, perhaps, and we might see more of her in Mike's storyline. Maybe, I don't know. And I suppose it was there also to show why Mike changed his mind and decided to get involved in the nacho stuff because, being the grandparent and, life was not doing it for him. So he longed to get back involved in some of this criminal, shady things. So let's start with Price, the old baseball card nerd guy. I honestly never thought we'd see him again, but the show has a habit of bringing back characters that we thought we were done with, and I like it. I think it really works. But anyway, I really love the scene where he returns home, unlocks like 3 locks, and then turns off this complicated alarm only to find Nacho sitting in the house waiting for him. The way he just jumped up was so hilarious. It just cracked me the fuck up. Of course, I knew that there would be someone waiting for him in the house as soon as they made such a big deal about all the security measures that he had, but honestly I thought it would be Mike, but of course it makes more sense for it to be Nacho, as Nacho is planning on using him to get more pills for Hector, whom he plans to eliminate with them. I thought it was interesting how Price was asking what happened if he refused, but Nacho never actually threatened him. He offered him $20,000 and simply said, do it. He has a very sort of threatening tone to him, but he never actually threatened him, which I think was genius, because like the old saying goes, you get more bees with honey than vinegar, but still the implied undercurrent of or else was still there. So when Price goes to Mike, which actually was uncharacteristically smart of Price in this and on his part, he seemed like he had learned a few lessons. And Mike kept trying to talk him out of it, saying But it didn't work because whether Price was willing to admit it or not, he was too scared of Nacho to say no to him. So it was actually the right thing for Mike to eventually say yes, but of course this had more to do with him wanting to be involved with, criminal stuff rather than actually wanting to help Price. So when Mike goes to meet with Nacho, this was really interesting as Nacho was just like, oh, really? when he saw him. And he reassures Mike that he isn't there to rip Price off, which I think he means sincerely because he wants this to go as smoothly and quietly as possible. But Mike is more concerned with what Nacho's plan actually is. And but he's pretty much deduced it for himself. But Nacho tells him what it's about, and it's about his father and how he's basically a dead man unless something happens to Hector, so he has no choice in the matter. So Mike doesn't try to talk him out of it necessarily, but it's obvious he's thinking of Gus and tells Nacho he doesn't really know who he's dealing with. But Mike agrees to the deal, but asks for one more thing, and he pulls out his notepad. Now, what this thing is and how it will affect the story, I have no idea, but I'm really curious to learn more about this and see how this affects things going forward. I'm also curious to how Nacho's plans affects, Gus's plans for Hector, and I wonder if Mike is actually going to tell Gus about what Nacho plans, but we'll see. So my rating for Expenses out of 10 is a 6 good. A few things about this episode I really enjoyed, like the moments of comedy when the film crew were bumping into each other trying to get into Jimmy's car quickly, and when Nacho simply walked out of Price's back door when he had all these security locks on his front door. And it was also had interesting moments that pushed the story forward, such as learning about Kim's guilt, seeing Jimmy go after Chuck even more, and of course seeing Nacho move forward with his plans to get Hector. But there are also a lot of scenes that were either unnecessary or just dragged on for too long, so it kind of bogged this episode down and made it one of the less interesting ones of the season, in my opinion. So that's it for my review of Expenses. Be sure to check back here every week as I continue to review episodes of Better Call Saul. Also be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, The Leftovers, The 100, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.